The resonance chamber of the Vexel Directorate was a hollowed-out moon, and its silence was a physical weight. Light, ancient and strained, filtered through colossal crystal pillars that pulsed with the slow, deep thrum of the Directorate's collective anxiety. Ionized air, thick with the scent of ozone and cooling metal, carried the low, resonant hum of the chamber's life support, a sound that usually offered comfort but now seemed to amplify the void. At the heart of this immense cavern, on a dais of polished obsidian, stood the three pillars of Vexel authority. Their crystalline carapaces, intricate lattices of living mineral, shimmered with the suppressed light of their emotions. Director Primus Tharian, whose shell was a deep and stable sapphire, felt the gazes of his two most trusted advisors as a pressure against his own weary spirit. The war was in its 100th cycle. The Cathar hegemony, a tide of biological horrors that consumed star systems with the mindless hunger of a plague, was pressing at the coreward flank. Fleets had been shattered, worlds glassed, and hope, a resource more precious than any isotope, was dwindling. Yet it was not the Cathar that dominated their thoughts in this solemn conclave. It was the ghost. The data remains unchanged, Director Primus. High Strategist Korvath's voice was a sharp, percussive series of clicks and resonations, the sound of grinding stone. His carapace was a molten crimson, shifting and swirling like magma, a perfect reflection of his aggressive, pragmatic soul. He gestured with a bladed forelimb towards the tactical hologram suspended between them. It depicted the Viridian Nebula, a graveyard of Vexel warships and Cathar bioships. And at its center, a single, impossibly stark icon labeled only as anomaly. It appeared, it engaged, and it vanished. No energy signature upon arrival. No thermal bloom from its weapon discharges, no detectable propulsion wake upon departure. It simply was and then was not. The anomaly, which the surviving crews had begun to call the Phantom, had single-handedly turned the tide in the Battle of Viridian. A Cathar Leviathan, a creature of hardened carapace and bioplasma cannons that had broken the spine of the Vexel Third Fleet, had been neutralized in moments. Not destroyed in a blaze of glory, but simply inert. Its organic systems failed catastrophically, its life functions ceased, its weapon portals dissolving into inert tissue. The Phantom had not fired a single projectile, lance, or missile that Vexel's sensors could detect. It had simply been present, and the Leviathan had died as if the universe had forgotten the laws that allowed it to exist. "It is a weapon," Korvath insisted, his crimson shell deepening. "A weapon of unimaginable power. It fights the Cathar. We must understand it. We must harness it. If it is a new player on the galactic stage, we must make them our ally before the hegemony does." Lorekeeper Alara shifted, the soft, opalescent white of her carapace shimmering with 1,000 pastel hues of contemplative thought. Her voice was a low, melodic chime, a stark contrast to Korvath's grating certainty. "Or it is not a weapon, High Strategist, but a phenomenon. To harness a storm or to ally with a supernova is the logic of a child who does not understand the forces at play. Our logs show no record of any civilization, not even the progenitors, capable of such localized reality negation. The ship, it does not radiate heat because it seems to operate outside thermodynamics. It does not have a propulsion trail because it does not seem to move through space, but rather to re-exist from one point to another. To call it a ship is to apply a familiar name to something that may not be a construct at all." Tharian remained silent, his sapphire carapace reflecting the swirling nebula in the hologram. He understood both perspectives. Korvath saw a tool for survival, a blade in the dark. Alara saw a profound mystery, a potential existential threat far greater than the Cathar. The Directorate was caught between the certainty of a slow, grinding extinction at the hands of the hegemony and the terrifying uncertainty of this ghost warship. The reports from the Viridian survivors were disjointed, filled with the language of superstition rather than military precision. They spoke of a vessel that was blacker than the void, a shape that seemed to drink the light of nearby stars, a silence that fell over their comms systems as it passed. It moved with the grace of a predator, yet its actions were precise, almost surgical. It had disabled the Cathar Leviathan and the swarming brood ships around it, then ignored the battered Vexel fleet entirely, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. "It has been sighted 3 times now." Tharian's voice was the deep, resonant toll of a massive bell, a sound that commanded stillness. "Each time at a pivotal engagement. Each time it has targeted only the Cathar. It has made no attempt to communicate. It has made no hostile move toward our forces. It acts as a predator culling a sickened herd, indifferent to the healthier beasts that watch from the periphery." He turned his ancient gaze to Korvath. "You wish to capture it, How does one lay a snare for a shadow? How does one cage a thought? We deploy the fleet at the next likely flashpoint. The Cygnus Passage, Korvath projected, his tone unwavering. The Cathar are massing there. We will engage, we will take heavy losses to draw the Phantom out. When it appears, we will spring our trap. Stasis fields, gravitic anchors, dimensional nets. We will throw every theoretical weapon we have at it. Something must hold it. Even a ghost can be exorcised. And if your exorcism is perceived as an act of aggression, Alara countered, her opalescent shell flaring with a pale, worried light. This entity has demonstrated the ability to casually rewrite physical law. What do you imagine it would do to a fleet that attempted to cage it? It could unravel our ships atom by atom. It could collapse our crews into singularity points. You are proposing we poke the divine with a sharp stick, high strategist, to see if it bleeds. The weight of the decision pressed down on Tharian. For generations, the Vexil had been masters of their corner of the galaxy. They were a civilization of logic, of crystalline order and resonant harmony. They understood the universe through mathematics, through the elegant dance of energy and matter. The Phantom was a violation of that understanding. It was a note of pure chaos in the symphony of creation, and it terrified him more than any number of Cathar fleets. Because the Cathar, for all their horror, were a known quantity. They followed the rules of biology, of hunger and expansion. They could be fought even if the fight was a losing one. The Phantom obeyed no rules he knew. "We have made another discovery," Alara said, her voice dropping to a near-subsonic hum, drawing the attention of both males. She manipulated a smaller holographic display, bringing up a star chart. A small, unremarkable yellow star was circled in pale blue light. Sector 7 Gamma, an undeveloped system. The Directorate classified it as a low-priority observation zone cycles ago. A pre-spaceflight civilization, carbon-based, volatile. We placed a cordon of deep space sensor buoys around their system to monitor them, as is our protocol. Korvath made a dismissive gesture. Primitives, what bearing could they possibly have on this? The Phantom's last disappearance, Alara stated, her voice heavy with meaning. It did not simply vanish from our tracking systems. It left behind a residual quantum echo, a faint, decaying ripple in spacetime. Our most sensitive listening posts in the outer rim managed to triangulate the terminus of that ripple. The vector points directly and unequivocally to this system. She zoomed in on the third planet from the star, a world of blue oceans, white clouds, and green continents. It points to the home of the species known as humans. A heavy silence descended once more, deeper and more profound than before. This was an impossibility, an absurdity. The humans were a young race, barely out of their planetary cradle. The Vexil's long-range scans had catalogued their world's frantic, chaotic electronic chatter, their primitive chemical rockets, their crude fission weapons. They were decades, perhaps centuries, away from achieving sustainable interstellar travel. The idea that they could be responsible for a vessel that defied the laws of physics was not just unlikely. It was a logical contradiction of the highest order. A coincidence? Korvath scoffed, though the magma in his carapace swirled with a flicker of uncertainty. A false echo. The energy discharge from the Phantom's departure must have created a lensing effect, a gravitic anomaly that distorted the signal's true origin. The calculations have been verified by 3 independent analytic cores, Alara said softly. The probability of error is less than 1/1,000,000th of a percentile. The ghost warship came from the direction of the human homeworld. Tharian stared at the image of the blue and white planet. He remembered the initial contact report. The humans had been classified as chaotic sentient, a species prone to internal conflict and rapid, unstable technological leaps. Their psychology was deemed dangerously individualistic, their societal structures fragile. They were not a species that could produce something like the Phantom. Such a creation would require a unity of purpose, a depth of scientific understanding, and a level of technological mastery that took most species millennia to achieve. The Vexil had built their first starships when the humans were still chipping flint into arrowheads. "It is a ruse," Korvath concluded, his logic reasserting itself. "The entity, whatever it is using that primitive system as a smokescreen, a plah. See, no one would think to look for the heart of such power. It is an intelligent deception. Or, Alara whispered, her voice barely a chime, we have made a catastrophic misjudgment about what it means to be primitive." Tharian felt the ancient crystal of his being resonate with a deep, cold dread. He had led his people through war and famine, through political schism and technological revolution. But he had always operated from a foundation of knowledge, of predictable realities. Now that foundation was fracturing. The Cathar were the devil they knew. But this Phantom, this ghost from a forgotten sector, was a terror born of absolute, soul-crushing ignorance. and the trail led to a species they had dismissed as little more than clever animals. The weight of command settled on him, heavier than a collapsing star. He had to make a choice. Gamble on capturing a god, or seek answers from a species of unpredictable, chaotic primitives who might somehow hold the key to salvation or annihilation. The two possibilities were so far apart, yet so terrifyingly intertwined, that for the first time in his long life, Director Primus Tharian felt truly, utterly lost in the dark. He raised his head, the sapphire of his carapace hardening into a resolute, deep blue. "High strategist, you will assemble your fleet at the Cygnus Passage. Prepare your stasis fields and your dimensional nets, but you will not engage the Phantom. You will hold your position and observe. Your fleet will be a shield, not a snare." He then turned his gaze to Alara. "Lord Keeper, you will prepare a diplomatic vessel, the fastest, most discreet ship we have. You will chart a course for Sector 7 Gamma. We will not send a fleet. We will not send warriors. We will send a question. We will approach these humans, and we will ask them about their ghost." The decision hung in the ionized air of the resonance chamber, a fragile crystal of intent in a universe suddenly filled with shattering glass. The path of caution, the path of inquiry. It felt right. It felt logical. But as Tharian looked at the tranquil image of the distant blue world, he could not shake the feeling that he had just set his civilization on a course toward a truth it was not ready to comprehend. The ghost warship had ruled the battlefield. The chilling question was whether its masters ruled with a benevolent hand or a closed fist. The Vexel diplomatic vessel, the luminous cord asterisk, was a thing of beauty and subtlety. It was not a warship. Its form was slender and organic, like a polished seed adrift in the void. It moved through the folds of hyperspace not by tearing them open with brute force, but by resonating with their underlying harmonics, slipping between dimensions with a whisper. On its bridge, Lord Keeper Alara stood before a viewport that showed the swirling, unreal energies of folded space. Her opalescent carapace was a calm, steady pearl, a forced projection of tranquility that masked the turbulent currents of apprehension within her. She was accompanied by a small retinue of linguists, xenologists, and first contact specialists, the finest minds the Directorate could offer. Yet they were all proceeding on a mission based on a logical absurdity. Their journey to Sector 7 Gamma was one of profound tension. They were preparing to question a species about a technology that Vexel science insisted could not exist. Every protocol they reviewed, every diplomatic scenario they simulated, felt inadequate. How does one address a people who might be masters of reality itself, yet who still broadcasted primitive dramas about mating rituals and territorial disputes across their planet's airwaves? The dichotomy was too vast. It suggested either a deep, cultural schizophrenia or a level of deception so profound as to be an art form. As the asterisk luminous cord translated back into normal space at the edge of the human system, the first surprise came not from the humans, but from the silence. The chaotic sphere of radio and electromagnetic noise that had characterized the system on previous scans was gone. The space around the third planet was quiet. It was a controlled, ordered silence. There were signals, but they were tight-beam, encrypted, and efficient. The frantic, wasteful broadcasts of a young civilization had been replaced by the disciplined hum of a mature one. The change was so drastic, so sudden, it was as if they had matured 1,000 years in the 50 cycles since the last Vexel survey. "Sensors are picking up orbital structures," the ship's primary sensor analyst reported, its voice a series of modulated chimes. "Not the crude chemical stations we had on record. These are vast, ring worlds, orbital habitats on a massive scale, and a defensive grid. The energy readings are subtle, but they are there. A network of something. It's not a conventional shield grid. It's a passive field. It seems to be waiting." Alara felt a frisson of unease travel through her crystalline foe. RM, this was not the world they had studied. This was something new. Something had happened here, a technological singularity, a cultural renaissance of impossible speed. Before she could issue an order, a signal targeted them. Not a hail, not a challenge, but a simple, elegant stream of pure mathematics. It began with prime numbers, then the value of pi, then the golden ratio. It moved on to basic physics, the hydrogen spectrum, the Planck constant. It was a universal greeting card, the language of intelligence itself. It was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of aggression. "They are speaking to us in the language of first principles," the lead linguist chimed, its carapace glowing with intellectual excitement. "They are demonstrating that they understand the foundations of the universe. This is a greeting of equals." Alara ordered her comms officer to respond in kind, to complete their mathematical equations and offer new ones, a dialogue of pure logic. The exchange continued for several minutes, a silent, beautiful dance of numbers and concepts. Then the human signal changed. It sent a packet of data, a language codex. It was not a Vexel translation. It was a guide to their own primary language, the one they called English. The packet included grammar, syntax, cultural context, even poetry and philosophy. It was an offering of staggering trust and transparency. "They are inviting us to speak," Alara murmured, awed. "They are giving us the key to their minds." Using the codex, the asterisk luminous chord's asterisk translation matrix worked at incredible speed. Within moments, they could understand the next message that arrived. It was audio accompanied by a simple visual of a woman. She was of average height for her species, with dark hair tied back from a face that was serene and composed. Her eyes, a deep brown, held a look of profound, weary intelligence. She was not in a military uniform, but simple, functional gray clothing. She stood on what appeared to be the bridge of a ship, but it was unlike any bridge Alara had ever seen. It was minimalist, almost empty, with no visible controls or consoles, just smooth, dark walls that seemed to shift with faint internal light. "This is Ambassador Eva Rostova of the Terran Alliance," the voice said, the translated Vexel equivalent smooth and melodic. "We have been expecting you. Welcome to the Sol system. We apologize for the quiet. We have recently concluded a period of internal reorganization. Please transmit your vessel's schematics so we may guide you to a secure docking port. You have nothing to fear from us." The name Terran Alliance was new. The title Ambassador was not. This was a formal diplomatic greeting. It was also a soft command, a request wrapped in the velvet of politeness but backed by the steel of a civilization that had clearly mastered its own space. Alara conferred with her staff. The risk was immense. Sharing their schematics could reveal vulnerabilities, but to refuse would be an act of distrust, a diplomatic misstep from which they might not recover. And more than that, she felt an overwhelming sense of curiosity. The serenity of this human, the quiet confidence in her voice, did not align with the Vexel psychological profiles of her species. "Transmit the schematics," Alara commanded. "Full unredacted schematics. Trust must be offered to be received." The moment the data was sent, a path of soft blue light illuminated in the void before the luminous chord asterisk, a gentle guide leading them toward a massive orbital structure near the planet's moon. It was a docking station of breathtaking scale, yet it seemed almost empty. There were no swarms of ships, no bustling traffic, just a profound, watchful stillness. As their ship was drawn into a docking bay by unseen forces, the sense of unreality deepened. The technology was seamless, silent, and operated with a grace that bordered on the magical. The docking clamps engaged without a single jolt. The airlock hissed open, revealing not a squad of armored soldiers, but the same woman from the transmission, Ambassador Rostova, standing alone in the reception area. Alara and her two aides, their carapaces shimmering with a mixture of caution and awe, stepped out onto the deck. The air was clean, the light soft. The architecture was utilitarian but possessed in strange, monastic beauty. It was a place built for purpose, not for show. "Lord Keeper Alara," Ambassador Rostova said, her lips forming the alien sounds of Alara's name with surprising precision. She gave a slight bow, a gesture of respect the Codex had identified. "On behalf of the Terran Alliance, I thank you for coming. We have much to discuss. The war with the Cathar has reached a critical stage." The casual, direct mention of the war sent a ripple of shock through the Vexel delegation. There was no pretense, no diplomatic maneuvering. This human spoke as if they were already allies, as if she was simply catching an old friend up on Resen. "T events, you know of our struggle?" Alara managed, her resonant voice carefully modulated to hide her astonishment. "We have been observing," Rostova said, her expression unchanged. It was not a cold look, but one of deep, abiding calm. "We observed the Cathar's expansion. We analyzed their biology and their strategy. We observed your valiant but costly defense. We determined that your civilization possessed a level of sapience and cultural richness that warranted intervention." "Intervention?" Alara pressed, the core of the mystery now within her grasp. "The vessel, the one our crews call the Phantom, the UNS Silentium Asterisk," Rostova supplied the name without hesitation. "It is one of ours. It has been conducting limited surgical strikes to slow the Cathar advance and analyze their weaknesses while minimizing our own direct exposure. It was a temporary measure. We knew you would eventually trace its operational vector back to us. We felt a direct conversation was more efficient than allowing speculation to fester." Here it was, the confession, the calm admission that this chaotic, primitive species was responsible for the single greatest military and scientific mystery in Vexel history. Alara's mind struggled to reconcile the image of the race that had once fired chemical rockets at their own moon with the quiet confidence of the woman standing before her. "Your technology," Alara said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. It is not possible. It violates known physical principles. Our greatest minds have studied the sensor readings. The silentium, it does not seem to exist in the same reality as our ships. Rostova's lips curved in a faint, sad smile. That is a more accurate description than you might realize, she said. Our understanding of physics has evolved. What your sensors perceive as a violation is, to us, simply a deeper application of the rules. The universe is more complex than a simple framework of matter and energy. Come, I will show you. She led them from the docking bay through silent corridors of dark, shimmering metal. There were no other humans in sight. The station felt deserted, yet fully operational. It was unnerving. They entered a transport system, a small, enclosed room with no visible controls. The door closed, and for a moment there was a sense of profound dislocation, a feeling not of movement, but of replacement. The door opened again, and they were in a different part of the station, looking out a vast viewport at the blue and white marble of Earth below. And docked nearby, hanging in the void, was the ghost warship, the UNS Silentium Asterisk. It was even more unsettling up close. It was a vessel of impossible angles and perfect, absolute blackness. It did not reflect the light of the distant sun. It absorbed it. Its hull was a seamless, featureless void, a hole cut in the fabric of spacetime. It had no visible engines, no weapon ports, no sensor arrays. It was a pure geometric shape of silent, unimaginable power. It was less a machine and more a physical manifestation of a mathematical concept. It does not move through space, Rostova explained, her voice soft as she stood beside Alara at the viewport. It redefines its position within the quantum foam. It is never truly in one place, but rather expresses a high probability of being in a chosen location. That is why it has no propulsion signature. To move is to traverse distance. The silentium does not traverse, it simply arrives. Alara felt her understanding of reality begin to crumble. This was not technology. This was metaphysics and acted as engineering. And its weapons? She asked, her voice a hushed whisper. It does not project energy, Rostova said. It projects information, a targeted field that overwrites local physical constants. We can, for a nanosecond and within a highly confined area, convince a small patch of reality that, for example, the strong nuclear force is 10% weaker than it should be. The target's atoms then simply come apart. Or we can tell the laws of biology that a specific complex protein chain is no longer a viable structure. The Cathar bioships are complex, but they are still slaves to biology. We simply tell their biology to stop. It is precise, efficient, and generates no waste heat. The Vexel delegation was silent. The concepts Rostova was describing were so far beyond their own science that they might as well have been magic. This was the power of a creator, to whisper new rules to the universe and watch it obey. How? Alara finally asked, turning from the terrifying beauty of the warship to face the human ambassador. How did you learn this? Our records show your species was volatile, divided. You were on a path to self-destruction not a century ago. Ambassador Rostova's calm expression finally broke, replaced by a shadow of immense ancient grief. It was a sorrow so profound that Alara felt its resonance in her own crystalline structure. We were. Rostova said, her voice dropping. We were a race of brilliant, violent children poised to burn down our own cradle. We fought. We poisoned our world. We built weapons that could shatter continents, and we were about to use them. She turned to look back at the earth below. Then we were interrupted. During what we call our final war, our last, most terrible global conflict, something activated. A signal, not from the stars, but from within our own system. An artifact that had been lying dormant in the cold dark beyond the orbit of our farthest planet for longer than our species had existed. She led them to the center of the observation deck. A new hologram flickered to life. It showed not a ship, but a vast, impossibly complex object. A crystalline lattice of structures, kilometers wide, drifting in the void. It looked ancient, inert, and utterly alien. We call it the Teacher, Rostova said. We do not know who built it. We do not know why they left it in our system. But as our world was on the brink of nuclear fire, it awoke. It didn't stop us. It didn't intervene directly. It simply began to broadcast, not a message of peace or a warning. It broadcast knowledge, the true mathematics of the universe, the principles of quantum reality, of space-time engineering, of the fundamental grammar of existence. It was a textbook, left for any mind intelligent enough to listen. She paused, and the weight of her next words filled the room. Faced with the revelation of a universe so much grander and more complex than our petty squabbles, our war simply stopped. The promise of the stars was more compelling than the hatred of our neighbors. Our entire species turned its focus outward, united by a single, common purpose, to understand the gift we had been given. We went from a race of warring tribes to a unified scientific collective in a single generation. Our internal conflicts didn't just end. They became meaningless, absurd. The technology you see, the silentium asterisk, the quiet in our system, this is the result of that gift. We are not the masters you think we are, lore keeper. We are merely the first students of a much older, much wiser power. Alara stared at the image of the alien artifact, her mind reeling. The mystery of the humans' sudden leap was solved, but it opened up a chasm of new, more terrifying questions. Who were the builders of this teacher? Where had they gone, and why would they leave such a profound instrument of power in the hands of a species like humanity? You used this knowledge to build a weapon, Alara stated, the observation hanging in the air. We built a tool, Rostova corrected gently. A tool for survival. The teacher's broadcast also contained other things, fragments of data, historical records, we think, not of the builders but of others. Of countless civilizations rising and falling across the galaxy over millions of years. And it contained a warning, a single repeating concept, translated into 1,000 different forms of communication, from mathematics to biological markers. The concept is a harvest, a pruning. She turned to face Alara, her brown eyes filled with a gravity that seemed to pull all light into them. The Cathar are not an accident of evolution, lore keeper. They are a tool, just as our ship is. A biological plague, designed or guided to sterilize regions of the galaxy. They are the first wave, the prelude. They are the fire that burns the fields before the true harvesters arrive. We intervened in your war not just to save your people, but to find allies. Because the teacher's final lesson was a simple one. We are not alone, and what is coming for us is older than the stars. A profound, galactic silence seemed to emanate from the quiet human and her ghost warship. The Vexel had come seeking the truth about a mysterious weapon, fearing they were facing a new, godlike rival. They had found instead a species of humble students, elevated by a cosmic inheritance they barely understood, who now stood as the galaxy's first, and perhaps only warning bell against an apocalypse of unimaginable scale. The war with the Cathar was not the true war. It was merely the opening skirmish. Alara looked from the human ambassador to the impossible ship, and then out to the stars beyond. The universe no longer felt vast and empty. It felt watched. The fear she had felt in the resonance chamber was a child's fear of the dark. This new feeling was the cold, lucid terror of an adult who has finally understood the nature of the monster hiding just beyond the light. Humanity, the chaotic primitives, had been given the fire of the gods. And they were now offering to share it, not for conquest, but for a desperate, final stand against the encroaching night. Her mission was to ask a question about a ghost. She was returning with an answer that would change the destiny of her entire civilization, and perhaps every thinking being in the galaxy. Back in the resonance chamber. The air was thick with a new kind of tension. It was not the anxious uncertainty of before, but the heavy, charged silence that precedes a storm. Alara had delivered her report. The holographic displays between the three Vexel leaders no longer showed tactical maps of the Cathar War, but the translated data from the humans, images of the teacher artifact, diagrams of quantum engineering that made Vexel physicists tremble, and the final, chilling translation of the ancient warning, the pruning. The harvest, Director Primus Tharian stood motionless, his sapphire carapace so dark it seemed to absorb the light. For hours he had not spoken, merely absorbing the sheer, paradigm-shattering weight of Alara's findings. The universe he knew had been a lie, a tranquil illusion masking a truth of cosmic predation. His people were not a dominant galactic power. They were livestock, unaware of the farmer. High strategist Korvath, for the first time in his career, was utterly still. The crimson magma of his shell had cooled to a deep, troubled burgundy. The pragmatic, aggressive certainty that had defined him was gone, replaced by the profound shock of a warrior who learns his lifelong enemy is but a puppet, and the real threat is the puppeteer, whose face he has not yet seen. The ghost warship was not a prize to be captured. It was a sentinel, a desperate creation of a neophyte species that had stumbled upon a terrible secret. They offer an alliance, Tharian finally spoke, his voice a low, resonant wave that seemed to make the very crystal of the chamber vibrate with sorrow. They, a species we dismissed as inconsequential, offer to stand with us. They who have been gifted with a power that could make them gods offer themselves as equals. It is a power they seem to fear, Alara added softly, her opalescent shell shimmering with empathy. Ambassador Rostova, her people carry a great burden. They call themselves the Alliance, but they are alone. They were a fractured species that found unity only in the face of this cosmic terror. They do not see their technology as a gift, but as a responsibility, a duty to warn the rest of us before the harvest begins in earnest. The Cathar, Korvath rumbled, his voice rough with a new, focused anger. All this time we fought them as a force of nature, a mindless plague, but the humans say they are a weapon, a directed tool. That implies a wielder. an intelligence. His crimson began to glow with a hot, renewed fire, no longer the fire of arrogance, but of pure, cold rage. To be culled by a mindless blight is a tragedy. To be exterminated by a thinking being using such a tool, that is an obscenity. He turned to Tharion, his posture once again that of the high strategist, but his purpose was transformed. Director Primus, this changes everything. Our war is not for territory or resources. It is for the right of sapient life to exist. The human proposal for a joint fleet combining our strategic knowledge and numbers with their reality-altering technology is our only logical path forward. We must accept. Tharion looked from the warrior to the scholar, from the embodiment of his people's strength to the keeper of their soul. He saw the same conclusion in both their forms. The old ways were dead. The old maps were useless. The Vexel Directorate, a proud and ancient power, was now a junior partner in a war for the soul of the galaxy, allied with a species of short-lived, soft-skinned bipeds who had looked into the abyss and, instead of recoiling, had begun to build weapons from its shadow. "They have one condition for this alliance," Alara said, her tone grave. "A condition they insist is non-negotiable. They do not wish for our technology, our resources, or our territory. They ask for our knowledge, all of it. Our histories, our philosophies, our sciences, our arts. They are building a library, a great archive of every sapient culture they can find. They call it the Aegis Protocol. They believe they may not win the coming war. The power that laid the Cathar upon the galaxy is ancient, and its motives are unknown. The humans are preparing for failure. Their ultimate goal is not just to survive, but to ensure that the idea of us, of the Vexel, of humanity, of any thinking species, is preserved. They are building a record of life's brief, beautiful defiance against the silent, hungry dark. This final revelation struck Tharion with the force of a physical blow. It was the calmest, most logical, and most profoundly courageous act of desperation he had ever encountered. The humans, in their sudden, violent enlightenment, had understood the stakes immediately. They were fighting not for victory, which they saw as uncertain, but for memory, for legacy. To leave a ghost behind, a testament that they had been here, that they had thought and felt and loved, before the all-consuming silence returned. He finally understood the serenity of Ambassador Rostova. It was not the peace of confidence. It was the peace of acceptance. The calm resolve of one who has embraced a terrible purpose and will see it through to its end, whatever that end may be. Humanity, the species of chaos, had found its center. It had found its soul not in conquest or glory, but in the quiet, solemn duty of being a librarian at the end of the universe. "We will accept their terms," Tharion declared, his voice ringing with a clarity that banished all remaining doubt from the resonance chamber. The sapphire of his carapace flared, not with fear or anger, but with a pure, bright light of purpose. "We will join our fleet to theirs. We will combine our minds, and we will open our archives. We will give them every poem, every theorem, every historical record and philosophical treatise our civilization has ever produced. We will aid them in building their ghost of memory." He looked at his two advisors, and for the first time in 100 cycles, he saw not a warrior and a scholar, but two equal partners in a new, grand, and terrible endeavor. "The Cathar are no longer our primary enemy. They are a symptom. Our true enemy is the silence that follows the harvest, the oblivion that awaits. Today, the Vexel Directorate ends its war for survival." He paused, letting the finality of his words settle into the ancient crystals around them. "And we begin our war for remembrance." In the months that followed, the galaxy began to change. The human vessel, the UNS Silentium *, no longer fought alone. It moved at the heart of a Vexel fleet, a dark, silent queen surrounded by a court of crystalline warships. The ghost warship, once a terrifying enigma, was now a symbol of a new, desperate hope. The combined fleet did not seek to reclaim territory. Their strikes were precise, strategic, and brutal, guided by Vexel tactical genius and executed with humanity's impossible physics. They targeted the Cathar's reproductive nexus points, the gargantuan biofactories that birthed new swarms. For every Vexel ship lost, a dozen Cathar leviathans were rendered inert, their biological processes simply ceasing to be. The tide of the war began to turn. The relentless advance of the hegemony slowed, then halted, then pushed back. But this was only the surface. The true alliance was happening in the quiet spaces between worlds. Vexel and human scientists worked side by side, the Vexel's deep, ordered knowledge of the material universe merging with humanity's radical new understanding of its fundamental grammar. Vexel historians and human archivists worked tirelessly, weaving the long, intricate tapestry of Vexel civilization into the growing human archive. They discovered that for all their biological and cultural differences, they shared a common spark, a curiosity that drove them to the stars, a capacity for love that bound their societies, and a deep, instinctual terror of being forgotten. Ambassador Rostova and Director Primus Tharian met often, sometimes aboard a Vexel flagship, sometimes on the starkly beautiful human orbital station. They spoke not as politicians, but as philosophers, two weary leaders contemplating the fate of their children. Tharian found himself humbled by the humans' resilience. They were a species that had lived on a knife's edge for their entire history, perpetually threatened by their own nature and their own world. That constant struggle, he realized, had forged in them a strength the long peaceful Vexel had never needed to cultivate, the ability to stare into the abyss without flinching. "We have decrypted more of the teacher's warning," Rostova said during one such meeting, her image projected into the resonance chamber. She looked tired, the calm in her eyes now tempered by a deep, abiding sorrow. "The entity, the harvesters, they are not a species in a way we would understand. They seem to be a function of the universe itself, a balancing agent. The teacher's data suggests they awaken on a cycle of 50 million years. They prune the galaxy of what they consider unstable emergent intelligence, any civilization that rapidly masters high-level energy and physics. It seems that life like ours is seen as a potential threat to some cosmic equilibrium. To be judged a weed and pulled from the garden of creation," Tharian resonated, a sound of profound melancholy. "A bitter fate." "Perhaps," Rostova countered, a flicker of that uniquely human defiance in her eyes. "But the garden has a new gardener now. The teacher was not just a textbook, we believe it was a seed. Left behind by a previous cycle of life, a civilization that faced the same fate and chose to leave behind the tools for their successors to fight back. They failed, but they passed their knowledge on. That is our purpose now, Tharian. We fight, we learn, and we ensure that if we fall, we leave behind a better weapon, a wiser book, for the next children of the stars who look up and wonder if they are alone." As the Cathar threat receded, pushed back. Into the dark spaces between galaxies, a new and more daunting task began. Using the combined knowledge of the teacher and Vexel long-range sensor technology, the Alliance began to search. They were looking for the harvesters, for the masters of the Cathar, and in the silent, cold abyss of intergalactic space they found something. It was not a fleet, it was not an entity, it was a structure, a construct so vast it dwarfed star systems. A web of silent, dark energy filaments spanning millions of light-years slowly, patiently contracting around their galaxy. It was a net and it was closing. The harvesters were not coming. They were already here, had been for eons, simply waiting for the right moment to pull the net tight. The Cathar were not a first wave. They were merely the twitching of the spider's web, a signal to the patient predator that something had been caught. The final, terrifying truth was revealed. This was not a war they could win by fighting. This was a prison they had only just realized they were in. On the bridge of his flagship, standing beside a holographic projection of Ambassador Rostova, Tharian gazed at the tactical display. The map of their galaxy was overlaid with the impossible, terrifying structure of the Harvester's net. The ghost warship, the UNS Silentium Asterisk, hung in the void beside them, a tiny speck of defiant black against an infinite, closing cage. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear, and absolute purpose. "It seems our war for remembrance has become more urgent than we knew," Tharian said, his voice calm and steady, a perfect echo of the human woman's own hard-won serenity. "The first duty of the librarian is to protect the library," Rostova replied, her gaze fixed on the enemy that dwarfed all imagination. "The Silentium and her sister ships are ready. They cannot break the cage, but they can hold a section of it open. They can buy time." Tharian looked at her, a deep and profound respect resonating through his ancient form. He looked at the human crew on her bridge, their soft faces illuminated by the light of their consoles, all of them focused, all of them calm, all of them ready to die for a poem written by a species they had met only a year ago. "Then let us buy as much time as the universe will allow," the Director Primus of the Vexel Directorate declared. The ghost warship, the vessel born of a human species' desperate second chance, no longer just ruled a battlefield. It now stood as the fulcrum upon which the memory of an entire galaxy would either be preserved or erased forever. The real war had just begun.